Hey everyone, in today's video I'm adding the bottom shelf to the custom cedar nightstand build project I'm working on. Now for this project I had a limited amount of cedar, so what I did is create thinner panels to maximize my availability of cedar to use, and I added it to a piece of plywood to give it strength and rigidity. If you're doing your own build and you're using this as a reference, you don't need to attach this to plywood if you have thick enough and enough lumber to do this with whatever lumber you're using. So I clamped the cedar and the plywood together with glue, let it sit overnight, and now I'm unclamping everything so I can move forward with these panels. You can see by using this method, I turned the thin pieces of cedar into thick, usable lumber. Now I just need to cut it to size and it'll be ready to install as a bottom shelf. Now the cedar comes with a lot of character, but with that there's some flaws and there's some prep work that needs to be done. So there's a spot here you can see a big knot that has this wet sap, and to take care of that I'll use either a brush cleaner or alcohol or something to dry it out and therefore harden it and get rid of the stickiness that comes with the sap area. Also, you'll see there's cracks and voids in this wood. Again, it adds a lot of character, but I want to strengthen the wood and I don't want those cracks to spread, and I want to provide some color to it, so I'm going to add some colored black epoxy to fill those voids. And the next step after I do that, I will sand it down and show you the process of prepping the wood before I actually install it into the nightstands. If you guys want to see some future videos on the epoxy, let me know. I'd be happy to do that, but for now I'm going to stick with just showing you how to move forward with getting the nightstand's bottom shelves installed. So I'm starting with some 60 grit sandpaper to knock down the epoxy to level it out with the wood. I over pour the epoxy, that way I can sand it down and it will be smooth and level. If you don't pour enough epoxy, then you're going to have some divots there and it's going to be a lower level. Now that would be fine too if you're going for the look I am, but I tend to start off with overfilling a little bit and then I'll just sand it down. I'm starting off with 60 grit sandpaper. I'll knock down the epoxy and then I'll put a fresh 60 grit on to do the entire surface width before moving to 120 and 220. I plan on doing a review on the sander that I'm using, but I will say now that it's helpful to have a vacuum ready and available, so when you're doing a lot of sanding you're able to clean as you go, and it just kind of speeds along the process and keeps it a little bit more clean and a little bit more particles out of the air. Alright, so now that I have all the epoxy knocked down, I'm putting on my fresh 60 grit and I'm going to go ahead and sand the entire surface. Next, I'll vacuum up all the loose material and then repeat the process one more time with 60 grit. Now I'll move on to 120 grit sandpaper and do the same thing. After which I'll do it again with 220, and that will be enough for my particular project. My plan is to give this a rustic but modern farmhouse look, utilizing darker stains which should go nicely with the grain patterns and the dark epoxy that's running through the wood. Now that I'm done sanding, I'm going to spray it down and wipe it thoroughly with a combination of water and alcohol. You don't need the alcohol, but I'm doing that to speed up the process of drying. That way I don't have to wait overnight. The reason we do this is to clean it really well, get rid of all the residue and the dust that's still laying on the board even after vacuuming, but also it will cause what they call grain raise, and some of the grain that's been sanded will actually raise up, giving a rougher feel. And what would happen is if you didn't take this step here, when you actually stain or apply a finish to this, it would actually raise the grain at that point and your surface would not be as smooth. So by doing this, you're going to get some of that grain that wants to raise up when it gets wet or it gets liquid finish applied to it. And then you'll come back and lightly sand it again with the final sandpaper you're using, which in my case is 220. And this will knock down that grain that wanted to raise when liquid was added to it. Therefore, when you come back and stain it later, you won't have as much grain raise and you'll have a nice smooth finished product. I'm going to repeat this process for the other bottom shelf, and then I will let you see what they both look like once they've had a chance to dry and after I've sanded them one more time and then wiped them clean. And now that that's done, here's a look at how they turned out. Okay, so now I'm ready to attach the bottom shelves to the nightstands. Here's a look of how well it fits inside. Now it's been cut to size and I've put it in there. I'm going to mark a couple of spots for pocket holes, and I will be attaching this with pocket holes and wood glue around all the edges. Now that I've completed a test fit and marked the locations for the pocket holes, I'm going to pull this out, take it over to the pocket hole jig, put my 4 pocket holes in. And 4 pocket holes should be more than enough, because when I actually install this, I'm going to use glue around all the edges, as you can see here. And therefore, once the glue dries, the pocket holes will hold it in place nice and tight. It should be a really good bond and very secure. Now, because this is a nice tight fit, it's a good idea to work quickly before the glue starts making it difficult to move this wood piece around. You want to get it lined up as quickly as possible. So as soon as I get it into a place, I'm going to check right away to make sure that it's level, and then once it is, I'll go ahead and attach some clamps to hold it securely while I put in the pocket hole screws. Okay, so it's the next day. I'm removing the clamps, and here's a look at how it turned out. And I'll repeat this process for the second nightstand. And here's a look at both nightstands with the bottom shelves installed. As you can see, they're nice and level and straight. And in future videos, I'll be milling cedar to fit inside this bottom shelf cubby to fill that up, and also to mill the tops, which are 2-inch thick pieces of cedar. So make sure you guys like and subscribe to see those upcoming videos. And here's a final look at the progress with the drawers in. I think they're looking good. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.